Hello, everyone. Welcome to our TestRail webinar for integrating TestRail with your CI and CD process. My name is John Reynolds. I will be the main speaker for this webinar. With us, we also have Jacob Scott, who will be answering some questions in the chat session and during some Q&A. With us, we also have Shanu Mondot. She will be possibly handling some questions in the chat console as well. This webinar is an intermediate level webinar, so some general knowledge of TestRail, TestRail's API, CI/CD tools, and programming languages would be helpful for anyone who has joined us. We'll show a couple of JavaScript and Python examples. We won't really be focused on writing any code, but a general understanding of how APIs and some of these items work would definitely be helpful. And if you are not familiar with TestRail's API, you can find a recording of our most recent API webinar on our website as well. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started here. We generally receive some common questions from customers when it comes to connecting TestRail to automation and other tools. So the questions are usually, can I integrate TestRail with Travis Ci, Jenkins, etc.? Can I submit my automated test results to TestRail? Can I kick off automation from TestRail? Can I push notifications to Slack or another app from TestRail? And all the question, or the answer to all of these questions is yes. Including TestRail in your CI or CD pipeline is usually accomplished using TestRail's API, allowing you to send data to and retrieve data from TestRail. TestRail also includes a UI scripts feature, which some people may not be familiar with, but UI scripts allow you to customize TestRail's user interface to create buttons and send data out of TestRail or even retrieve data from other tools as well. So our agenda today is to cover all of these things. So we're going to go through a brief overview of the API, a very brief overview, just touching on a couple of the items and endpoints we're going to use for this demonstration. We're going to show a couple of examples of using TestRail with both Jenkins and TravisCI. We're going to kick off automation from within TestRail. We're also going to use a UI script feature, not only to kick off the automation from TestRail, but also to send a notification to Slack as well. So those last two items are done using UI scripts. And the first two items are going to be using TestRail's API. I will also do a couple of just live build processes with Jenkins and Travis during those segments, just to show the items in action. So as the agenda stated, let's go ahead and get started and take a look at TestRail's API itself. You can find TestRail's API documentation on the TestRail website, theguroc.com/testRail/docs/API. So all of our the documentation can be found there. The documentation includes links to bindings for various programming languages: Java, PHP, Python, Ruby, and .NET. The documentation also includes examples for how to submit API requests to TestRail, sample responses for each API endpoint, and some other items such as response codes and other entities. So in this webinar, I'll only be covering specific API use cases, so I would recommend watching the Getting Started with the TestRail API webinar if you need a more in-depth explanation of how TestRail's API works and some practices with that. So the first thing I wanted to cover in TestRail is the difference between test cases and tests. One of the main API and TestRail topics that needs to be clarified is the difference between these two items. In TestRail, test cases are the processes in which will be followed to carry out your testing. So you define your test cases in your test suites or your single suite test case repository. Tests, however, are instances of your test case. So each test run in TestRail contains tests, and each of these tests contains a pointer or link to your existing test cases. So if you modify your test cases, the corresponding tests will be updated as well. However, the tests are where you would store your results in TestRail. So within the TestRail UI, you'll find test cases, as I mentioned, under the Test Cases tab or the Test Cases and Suites tab, depending on your project type. And the case ID in TestRail is the ID of the test case within this project. A test ID is going to be found within your test run, and the test ID is the ID of the test itself in the run. While this is related to a test case, it will have a distinct ID within the run itself, and you can find the test case, the test ID prefixed by the letter T and the case ID prefixed by the letter C. So the reason I'm explaining this is the different API endpoints will use different items. So some API endpoints will use case IDs and some will call for test IDs. So getting these mixed up will either cause an API error or potentially result in results being added to the wrong test. So since your test and test runs are based on test cases in your projects, you can submit results using either a test ID or a case ID. To do this, you would use the add result or add result for case endpoints or the associated methods for adding results in bulk. You can use either method to submit same results and configure automated testing around the methods which best suit your needs. So you don't have to use one or the other. You can use both, whatever you prefer. For consistency, I would probably recommend just sticking with one or the other. So as an example, when submitting test results to a test, you can add results, including separated step details, change a test assignee, add a comment, and add values to a variety of other result fields which you have configured. The most common use case would be adding an actual result to a test, but you can also perform all of these other actions when using an add result endpoint. When using the add result endpoints, you must do at least one of those things. So you must either add a status ID, add a comment, or change the assignee, or you can do a mix of any of those. The optional information would be the additional step details or other data comment fields. Those are optional. So with the brief API coverage, so those are the main API endpoints we're gonna use for submitting results using the automation scripts I've built. So now let's take a look at how we would actually take a set of sample cases and use these in both Travis and Jenkins. For these builds, I'll be performing unit tests against a file containing a set of math functions. So in TestRail, I have a project containing a set of folders and test cases. Each folder name in TestRail matches a function name inside a calculator file to be tested. So a folder name here highlighted add, so this will test the add function. So all of the cases in the add folder will be tested against the add function. And then in the case itself, I have custom fields for input values and an expected output. So when I run my automated tests, I will pull the input values from the automated test, get my output from my add function, and compare it to what I'm expecting to see. And then that will dictate whether or not I get a pass or failed status. So my test script for this example, I have a couple of files in GitHub along with the TestRail API bindings. This allows the Jenkins or Travis CI builds to include the binding so I can submit and receive results from TestRail. So I have my API bindings, a calculator.py script, which is the file containing basic math functions I'm going to be testing against. I have a calculator_test Python script with an algorithm which will iterate through all of these functions and perform tests. So first, I will retrieve all of my test case sections from TestRail for my project. Then I will create an empty array to hold all of my test results. For each section to be tested, I will collect the test cases in those sections. And then for each test case in the section, I will pass the input value to the function, compare the output, and determine the result status. And I'll also record the actual output returned by my function and any other information if I need it. And then when all of my tests are created, I will use the TestRail API to create a new test run. I will push all of my results to this test run, close the test run, and then output a link so that I can quickly open up that test run inside TestRail and view the results. So to run this in Jenkins, I have a Jenkins build which uses this calculator file, my calculator test script in Jenkins. So to actually implement this in Jenkins, I do need a couple of files in GitHub to support Jenkins. So I have my Jenkins file, which defines my pipeline. And in my test stage, I simply call my Python, my calculator test script. So I also utilize the Docker file to ensure the Python requests module is installed during the build. So I have a Docker file that installs the requests library, which is needed to make the API requests. And for this demo, these examples are quite simple. The files are pretty simple. This is just mainly for demonstration purposes. Anyone with experience can definitely expand these. The key is just showing that how you can use TestRail and incorporate your automated testing into your Jenkins build. So here in Jenkins, I have the output of a script which I started. So I kicked off my build in Jenkins. Looking at the logs, I can see that my results were complete with my link, as I mentioned, to my test run in TestRail. Now I'm actually going to do this, kick this one off live, just so you can see how this would actually work in Jenkins. So Jacob, just let me know when you can see my Jenkins screen.
I can see it. You're looking good.
Okay, so here I have in Jenkins, this is a basic Jenkins install. So if I hit my build now button, it is going to kick off my build. And we can just watch this run for a moment. So this is just building my environment, installing my modules that I need, which is really just requests for this in particular. So after the build, the tests themselves will only take 10 or 15 seconds. I don't remember the exact number of tests, but it's not a very big test suite. I only added, I think, 4 or 5 sections. So, but you can, if you're interested, you can find these on my GitHub public repository. I will post links to this at the end of the webinar, so you can see how I'm actually retrieving this data from TestRail and using it in my automated tests. You don't have to store your input data in TestRail or your output data or expected output. You can make your test cases more generic and then, define your input and just include that in the comments on the fly, or you can build it into your test suite as you would prefer. So this is just about done here. I apologize for this being a little slow. It's not on a very powerful virtual machine. So there we go. So now it says my tests are complete. So if I open up my shell script log, I see I have my results available link that I included in my script. So if I open this, I have all of my test runs marked as passed. My test run with all my tests, which did pass. I posted into the comment field my input, my expected output, and the value I received. So if these matched, I should get a passed value. So I'll just look at another test case as an example. This test case passed as well, or this test, I say. So that is generally how this build script works. Here's another screenshot, which I will just touch on just a moment. So there's just another screenshot of the actual results in individual cases. I could have built this to fail to provide an example of a failure. However, it's not really necessary for this basic of an example. So you can do the same thing in TravisCI. With Travis, you can have your test script triggered by a commit to GitHub. In this example, I'm actually just going to trigger this manually as well. You can trigger these Jenkins and Travis builds depending on a variety of criteria, whatever you prefer. I will just run this manually. I'm going to show example screenshots of one which I did trigger by a GitHub commit, but I'm going to run the same set of tests again using TravisCI as an example instead. So for TravisCI, similar to Jenkins, I have a couple of files that are required for Travis. So Travis uses a travis.yml file. So I define my language and my version. I install my requirements file, and then I run my script. So in this requirements file, I just require the requests library again. And when doing more complex build and deployments, you would just include your test scripts in the appropriate point, your CI process, or run multiple scripts, a variety of other things that you would need to meet your automation needs. So here, the screenshot here shows how this would look inside TravisCI. So I kicked off the build from a GitHub commit. It built my system and updated my results. Highlighted in red here, I show where the link is to this inside of Jenkins, or inside of Travis as well. So a similar process to what you would do in Jenkins. So as an example, I'm just going to run this inside of Jenkins, or inside TravisCI now. So instead of just doing a GitHub commit for speed's sake, I will just restart the build. So TravisCI, this is the web version. So this will just take just a moment to boot up the virtual machine, and it should spit out some results in just a moment. So if I scroll down through the log file here, it's a little more verbose than necessary, but so here it says it ran my Python calculator test, and my results are available here. So I ran the same set of tests, so I should expect the same set of past results. So if I look here, I've got a new test run, which I just did just a moment ago with my test results. So same set of tests should provide the same set of results. I was just doing this as an example of how this build would look inside of Travis. So Travis and Jenkins are just a couple of examples. You can use any kind of CI/CD tool you want to run your tests. So like I said, these are just examples. You would just apply the same process to any other tool you'd like to use, build your automated test case, and then kick them off from your continual build process. So now let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of more examples. A common question we get is regarding how do I start my automated tests from within TestRail? So TestRail's UI scripts allow you to create a button which can make an API request. So here I'm just going to use an API request button to kick off a notification, to send an API request to Travis to kick off another build. So to understand more about UI scripts, in the TestRail documentation, we do have a UI script section. There are a couple of disclaimers. UI scripts are not something that we treat like an API. So any changes to TestRail's interface over time can break UI scripts if you have them dependent on a certain element or an element location or ID tag. UI scripts can break over time. So with any TestRail update, it's kind of a good practice just to double check your UI scripts just to make sure that they still work. Generally, if they do break, so to speak, it's not a big break. You may just have to redefine a couple of variables, something like that. So that being said, so we also have a UI script repository available. So on our GitHub website, I'll post the link. That link will be shared at the end also. You can find some example scripts on how to, some UI scripts that customers find very helpful to use. So instead of, as mentioned, relying on a change in GitHub, I'm just going to call the Travis API to kick off a build. So here's an example UI script, which is in JavaScript. So this UI script adds a button to the TestRail's user interface. When I press the button, it will basically kick off my Jenkins build, which then calls my calculator script. So if I press the button, I will get a response alert that says that the build was successful. So I actually want just to go ahead and show you how that would work here. So if I go back to my repository here, so I'll wait for this page to load for some folks. Jacob, will you let me know when you see the screen?
I see your TestRail test cases screen right now.
Okay. All right. For some reason, it's telling me that nobody sees it. So.
Oh, odd. Yeah, no, looks good.
Okay. So, so here I have a start TravisCI button, which I just created, which the UI script created for me. So if I press this button, it will kick off my TravisCI build. So I get my alert window. Then if I kick back over to Travis, we're not going to watch it build, but we should see this start a new build in just a moment here. We don't need to watch it. We'll just make sure that it does start. And there we go. Travis is starting another build test for me. So my button works. So the UI script can be used not only to make an API call, you can call a local file. There are various implementations you can use the UI script for. Another example I'm going to show is using Slack, sending a notification to Slack. There are a couple of requirements to do this, which I'll cover here. So instead of triggering the build, we're going to send a message to a Slack channel. Before you can actually send data to Slack, you'll need to create an app and add it to your channel. So you would have to follow Slack's guidelines for actually developing an app. This is a very basic app, which I just created to accept messages. So Slack does have some boilerplate apps that you can use to implement this. So the Slack documentation can guide you through the process, and I'm not really going to go into detail on how to do that. However, once your app is created, you simply need to ensure the webhooks for the app are enabled, and then add the app to a channel. And with the app in a channel, you will get a channel-specific webhook URL, which we need for this UI script. So this is a UI script I built to post a message to Slack. So marked out in red is the key from my UI script, or from my webhook URL. But this is a pre-formatted item that just dumps out statistics from a test run. So adding this button, it would be located similar to where the TravisCI button is. You can place it other places in the UI that you can just send a run summary to Slack, or you can customize it in other ways. So when I add this button to Slack, or to TestRail, I just see the Slack notification within a test run. I press the button and it sends a notification over to Slack with a summary of the number of tests, failure rate, etc. This isn't the only way you could utilize something like this. You could also build this kind of notification into, say, this calculator script that I was using. I could build this actually same payload into the calculator script, and then when my test is completed, it can provide a link to the test run and also just automatically send a message to Slack or something else. So it's a pretty useful tool, and it's something that's not limited just to TestRail's UI scripts. Like I said, you can use it in anything that can send off an API request. So that pretty much covers it. I do actually want to add one more disclaimer to UI scripts. So when you are using UI scripts to send any kind of API request, please do keep in mind that the full contents of the UI script, are loaded into the TestRail's HTML. So if you have any kind of credentials in that UI script, be cautious on how you implement things because those credentials could be viewable by any TestRail user who can access the page where the UI script is loaded. So just be careful when using UI scripts or be conscious of those credentials. If you have all trusted users, it may not be a big deal to have, a webhook URL included. But if you're trying to perform other tasks, just be conscious of the risks associated with that. But there are also many other purposes for UI scripts other than just, API requests, things like that. So that is about all I have. So let's go ahead and answer some questions if anybody has some. So
definitely lots of questions coming in. Not sure we're going to be able to get to everybody, and I know some of these are a little bit more complex than we'd likely be able to really delve into here. For any questions that we don't answer directly, either through the chat console or through the through our open discussion here, if you do still have any other questions, or there's anything else you'd like to clarify, or we don't get to your question today, feel free to reach out to our support team at contact@gurock.com, and they'll be able to add any additional clarification to any of the questions you may have. So I know one of the things I've seen pop up in a few spots was just some questions about our key bindings and plans, any plans to add any more. I know ones that were specifically requested here were JavaScript and Golang. If we have any plans to set up any kind of bindings for those, or if that's something that we'd be interested in doing in the future. If you want to.
So additional key bindings?
Yeah, and there was one user asked, are there any plans to support JavaScript? And then one user asked, are there plans to add more bindings for other languages, specifically Golang?
Okay, so for JavaScript in particular, we don't have direct bindings ourselves. One of the reasons is there are already third-party libraries out there, like NPM. On Node Package Manager, you can find a TestRail API wrapper that's already available. So somebody's already put in a lot of work that you can easily configure. Now that's something that's written by someone else, so we wouldn't maybe directly be able to troubleshoot the code itself. But there are plenty of third-party libraries out there that support the TestRail API. So we don't have a JavaScript package available to do that. We do have a couple of examples of submitting API requests using JavaScript, which are straightforward. You can find in the GitHub repository on the bottom of this current screen. You can find a couple of JavaScript examples there. As far as Golang is concerned, I don't have anything of value to add at the moment regarding Golang. It's something we can definitely look into. And if we do have, if we do realize we have a good number of users that are using Golang, we can look at implementing something for that as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's see. I know, were you able to touch on the reports within the thing? I was answering questions, so I didn't get to pay super close attention to the actual presentation here.
Now, I did not cover reports in particular. If you have an API, a report configured to use the API, you could also just add an additional API request to your script that would kick off that API-enabled report. That's just a pretty straightforward API request once you have the report configured in TestRail. So you would just send a run report API request to get that taken care of.
Okay, so I'm kind of going through the questions here, trying to find ones I know we can get to. There's a lot of questions that are a little bit, I think, more complex than the scope of what we want to discuss here. So I'm trying to find ones that I know we can get through in a, kind of more direct response here. So Let's see. I know one user asked if there is a failed test case while running in Jenkins, can we automate TestRail to create a bug in Jira? Not currently, or not that I'm aware of. I have not seen a way to set that up. The push function in TestRail is kind of configured there for manual interaction, just because there are going to be some things that should be directly set up by the user when they are performing that push action. I have seen teams create a like add an additional section to their scripts that will create a bug independent of TestRail and Jira when there is a failed test. So that is one option there, but using that push function that allows TestRail to create new issues inside of Jira, that is not accessible via the API in TestRail. There may be ways to set that up, but I really wouldn't recommend it if you're going to use the API to create new issues outside of TestRail. Then interacting directly with Jira would probably be the better option there.
There is another question that's popped up I just want to address quickly. So I haven't seen all of the chat questions since I was doing the webinar, but I do want to just touch on this one real quick. From Umair Sati, I apologize if I've ruined your name, but can we run tests in TestRail using Postman for API tests? So yes, TestRail's API, while we have language-specific bindings already on our website, you can use TestRail's API with any software that supports API requests. So Postman, Insomnia, you can use any programming language you want. As long as you can send an API request, it doesn't matter which programming language or tool you're using.
Someone asked, like triggering Travis from TestRail, can we trigger a Jenkins job too? Yes, that UI script can be used to trigger just about any tool or external script. It's not tool specific for something like Travis. Those UI scripts that you would use to kind of set up a trigger inside of TestRail to another location. It's more about triggering the script itself rather than something within the tool. Definitely possible to use with Jenkins or just about any other automation tool.
Yeah, in this example, we used an API request, but you could call a specific file if that's what you needed to do.
Yeah, I see a couple different questions about that. So that was for Hari Mahesh and Helen Rikita. So both of y'all, it seems, asked roughly the same question. Can we trigger the Jenkins build via a Jenkins button? Yes, that button is not specific to any tools. The Slack integration that's been shown, instead of a button, can it be added automatically, like the notification? I have not played with that Slack integration too much. Do you know if that's possible?
So could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. So instead of a button, can the notification be added automatically into Slack?
Yeah, if you include it, say, in your test script, all you would do is take that API request from the UI script that I use as an example and build that into your test script, and then you can just build in the Slack notification off your test script. So that was just an example I used for a simple button to send a message to another tool.
Cool, thank you. Is it possible to get a list of tests from within a run using an API? I don't see test IDs in the get run response. There is a get tests API method that will show you more details about the tests that are included in a test run. You would do get tests, and then as part of the call, you would need to include the run ID as an additional parameter. And then that would return specific details about the tests within that run. So that's going to be the best way to get test IDs within a run and different information about what those tests actually include. right. A lot of very long, more detailed questions. I'm trying to get to the more simpler ones here.
Yes, some of the longer questions, if you're asking for specific use cases to meet your needs, it may be better to send those in an email to our support team, contact@grurock.com, so we can have a little more time to review them and provide you an answer. With some of these questions, it may take a little bit of thinking to actually get to a solid answer that would be really helpful.
Thank you. Let's see, the API seems like a good way to update the status of tests with some text message, but is there a way to upload files such as screenshots to the test run result? Yes, there are API methods for adding attachments to your test results. These are relatively new. I think they were added within the past year. The attachment API, or maybe like right around a year ago. But you can do, you can update once a test result has been recorded, then you can use an API method to attach a separate file to that test result once it's already been recorded in there. The test result does need to have already been configured and entered into the system in order for an attachment to be added to it. But if you have, your system is automatically taking screenshots whenever there is a specific, when a specific status occurs or anything like that, you can certainly include those in the system, and you can do that all via the script without needing to kind of manually update that info. I think it's like add attachment to result is the method, but I would recommend checking out the API documentation in the attachment section for more details on that. When using the TestRail API, I must enter the ID and password of my personal account, but I don't want to put my ID password in the test script. Is there another way? You can use an API key instead of a password. We strongly recommend setting an API key for that. You would need to still identify yourself as what your user account is, but the API key would be independent of your password and kind of take the place of your password, and that will keep things a bit more secure. You can set up API keys in your account by going to your profile, which is going to be the top right, like your name in the top right corner, and then go to My Settings, and then API keys. From there, you can add a new key, enter the name of the key, it'll generate a new key, copy and save that key for use inside of your script. And then once you finish adding the key that way, make sure to click the Save Settings button on your profile page in order to make sure that key is saved inside of the database and ready for use. Once you've got that saved and set up, then you can use that to replace your password inside of all of your automation scripts. Let's see. There's a lot of questions that are coming in, so I'm just trying to go through and find ones that I know we can get through quickly here. Definitely a lot coming in, and a lot of them are pretty complex at this point.
So there's a question from TH. What is the best practice for using credentials for UI scripts? I don't know if we have a best practice for them. If you can store the credentials, say, locally, and then have the UI script call your local file for credentials, that may be possible. You can find some information about triggering tests or triggering scripts from the UI script documentation. But if you are concerned about placing an API key, a webhook URL, or any other kind of, sensitive information in a UI script, then the best practice would be not to do it. So If you have TestRail installed on a secure server where it's only, on a secure environment where you're not too worried about it, that's different. So you can look at different ways for Ajax using JavaScript to retrieve those credentials, say from a different file. But if it's a concern, then just be wary of the risks involved with UI scripts.
Sorry, I was muted. I did see one person ask, is there a webinar for UI scripts? Not specifically. I do kind of like the idea of having a webinar specifically to touch on some of what's possible with UI scripts. That said, we do have a past recording for a webinar that is available that's just best practices in customization in TestRail, and that does go into UI scripts a fair amount. So I would recommend checking that out because it will explain a lot of what's possible and how people have leveraged UI scripts in the past, and also just discuss a lot of information about how to create and set up custom fields, templates, and other information like that. I do think that with our most recent upgrade to TestRail, or update to TestRail, that we might need to update that since there have been some changes to the template creation system. But that still gives you a lot of good information about just general best practices when setting up and creating custom fields, custom templates, and how to use UI scripts.
All right, we're coming up with just a couple minutes left here. So I do just want to extend a thank you to everyone who joined. And once again, the examples shown today are just examples. You can extend these to suit your needs. You can structure your test cases to hold data as you see fit. You can use generic test cases and more generic test cases, and then generate, say, input values within your test script, or you can store information in TestRail. TestRail also doesn't require any particular framework or a specific tool, so you can use any CI/CD tool, any automation language, any API tool you wish, as long as it can reach TestRail's API. And you may find additional tools helpful, such as RannerX, which allow you to synchronize your automated test cases between tools. There are third-party add-ons for things like Jenkins. There's an add-on such as Pangolin, which can be used to help integrate TestRail with Jenkins. So the possibilities are pretty endless as far as how you can integrate TestRail with any of your tools. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to send us an email to the contact@grurock.com. Once again, my name is John Reynolds, and with us also has been Jacob Scott. So our email is open, and if you have any further questions that we didn't get to answer, please feel free to send us an email, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon or morning.